Welcome to episode 207 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I'm joined by my incredible co-host.
That's me. I'm Jill Nowacki, the founder and CEO of Humanidei.
This episode is sponsored by Alacrity, a leading payments fintech helping credit unions compete with challenger banks and digital wallets. Alacrity delivers seamless real-time money movement experiences for loan payments, A2A transfers, digital distributions, and bill pay with a single cloud-native platform that connects the clearinghouse, Fedwire, ACH, and FedNow. Credit unions can modernize without overhauling their legacy infrastructure. Learn more at alacrity.com. Today, we're driving into a topic that hits close to home for a lot of leaders, whether they admit it or not. Imposter syndrome.
Yes, imposter syndrome. It may be a familiar feeling even to those leaders who haven't heard the term, which was coined in the 70s by psychologists at Georgia State University to describe the phenomenon of being highly accomplished, but still constantly feeling like a fraud. Downplaying one's own accomplishments, always being concerned about being exposed as incompetent or incapable. So the reason it might sound familiar, even if they've never heard the term, according to research, 70% of all people have experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. So today, we're going to shine a light on imposter syndrome, looking more closely at it through a leadership lens. We'll explore how imposter syndrome manifests in credit union leaders, the impact it has on teams and culture, and most importantly, how to move through it without letting it hold you or those you lead back. So let's get into it. And Randy, I'm going to ask you to share first.
Oh, I like when I get to do the intro.
Yep.
You share first.
That's why I called kids this time. Also, really cool about the new sponsor, Alacrity. That's awesome.
I know. Right. We're pretty excited about that. So thank you to them again. Another shout out.
I mentioned imposter syndrome, turns it around since the 70s, but I want you to share. Do you remember your first time hearing about imposter syndrome? And really kind of what were your first impressions of it?
So when I hear the term imposter syndrome, I go back to my first job out of college. And I think the imposter syndrome was almost a good term. They wanted you to have it in a sense because it was that fake it till you make it. And I remember the sales manager, it was in the financial services business, but on the dark side over in the brokerage business. And they were like, go buy a suit you can't afford, buy a watch you can't afford, look the part, be the part. Because you're nothing right now, right? Like, so it was always that. I mean, from my earliest professional memory, there was this sense of like, fake it until you make it. And I think that even while we were starting CUInsight, there was a part of that. So I think a lot of the times I come at it with like, oh yeah, well, we all have it. So fake it till you make it. There were times though, I think when completely switching careers and getting into digital media and things like that, where it was, wow, why are people paying attention to this? I don't know what I'm doing. I can go on. There's so many stories of the first couple years of CUInsight, just not even having a clue. And that feeling of like, oh, I better read up on this. And I know that even in my leadership journey, there's been a lot of times where I'm like, why am I qualified to lead this? So yeah, I do get it. But when I hear the term, the first thing that pops into my head is fake it till you make it. So I'm sure you're going to give a much more insightful thoughts on this. And I know this is something that you and I have talked about before. So I was really looking forward to asking this question back to you. But can you talk about imposter syndrome and how it's showed up in your leadership journey as someone who's led multiple organizations?
Yeah. So my favorite kind of imposter syndrome anecdote, in 2016, I wrote an essay for CUInsight called Stop Being Pretty Good for a Girl. Yep. And it was about some of the hesitations I was seeing with women in leadership. It got some good readership. I even got a DM from the publisher at the time giving me some kudos.
Hey, that might have been me.
And it also got me an invitation to speak about it at CU Water Cooler in the spring of 2017. And I was so excited for that opportunity to raise my voice for women in leadership. And in hindsight, this was really probably a genesis moment for Humanidei, that I was choosing Humanidei, the company, not the population, but I was choosing to step forward, speaking up about the value of that diversity in leadership creates. So while I enthusiastically accepted this invitation, I then also immediately signed up for a program through Cornell to get a certificate in women in leadership so that I was qualified to take the speaking gig that I'd already been asked to do. So that, my friends, is imposter syndrome in action. And frankly, there are probably a lot of leaders out there right now who listen to that and wish that their team members had that kind of imposter syndrome. That's kind of like what you were hearing about when you're like, hey, get out there, buy the watch, look the part, do the thing. People's response to not being 100% confident is to go out and find a resource, get educated and improve. What's the downside with that? But that's really where I think it's important to dig deeper into imposter syndrome. Because while on one hand, it does sometimes manifest in that way of perfectionism, going out, having a better edge, working harder, it can also manifest in self-sabotage at times too. And that kind of idea of, I feel very fortunate because of where life led you to with us. But if your early days of CUInsight were, geez Louise, why is anyone ever going to listen to me and who I am? I might as well not even try. Then you wouldn't be where you are right now. So that's kind of one side of it. Like hey, this imposter syndrome is giving me a special edge might be a reality. But there's also that, gosh, I'll never be good enough, so I won't even put myself out there. That happens too with it.
That is something to me that as a leader, I would say this, we often don't know if someone is experiencing imposter syndrome, right? Like the stress that it may be calling them. But in an organization, I do think that you can see it where is it we are not ready to do something. Like we don't know enough to do something. I know there have been plenty of things that we could have done early on at CUInsight that we didn't do because I wasn't confident enough to do it or to take that step, right? It was something that we had to push through. It was like, ooh, I don't know if we're ready for that. I don't think we're big enough for that, whatever that had to be. And I really do see that as like along the way in organizations that when then you see someone else maybe do it and all of a sudden you're like, well, if they did it, we could have done it.
Even like you'll see it manifest in that, like, who do they think they are to do that? Well, like a person who had an idea and some will. That's another way I think you can see imposter syndrome manifest is if you start to catch, so you're talking about like behaviors you might see in team members or things that might be symptoms of this imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
If you're coaching a team member and they're constantly focused about what some competitor is doing or even another colleague on the team or in the department. One way I remember at one point in my career hearing this, and it was actually me. I was the one who had signed up for this like leadership development program. And I found out later that someone else was talking to my boss and was like, well, who does she think she is to sign up for that leadership development program? And my boss was like, someone who wants leadership development. But the point of it was my colleague had never seen herself as a leader. So she hadn't raised her hand or put herself out there for this opportunity. And if you're noticing that, like you have a team member who's kind of questioning, like, well, why does that person get this? Or why does that company always end up at the whatever? Maybe to dig in a little deeper and say, well, why don't you think you raised your hand for that? Why wouldn't you put yourself out there for that opportunity?
It made me think of a story. There was a conversation, and I don't think he would mind me throwing this one out there because I've told this story.
There's only one way
before.
To find out.
Right. Yeah. So, well, he happens to edit the podcast and do all the show notes and everything. So John Pettit, our managing editor and the producer of this podcast, I remember it was a few years into his journey with CUInsight, and he had always said that he really didn't know a whole lot about credit unions and stuff like that. And one day it was back when we had an office, he made a joke that was so credit union jargon specific type of thing. And I'm like, you say you don't know credit unions. That literally is not funny to anybody who doesn't work in credit unions. You do actually. You have a whole lot of knowledge. You pick the news everybody gets to read every day, right? Like, and I think it was like that turning point where he's like, oh yeah, I actually know quite a bit about this from a blimp level.
So dorky and so awesome.
It was hilarious. I'll never forget it. I remember exactly how our office was all set up when he did it. And everybody in the room laughed at the joke. Like, it was a funny joke. I wish I could remember what it was, but unlike some people, I suck at remembering jokes. So, but it was an amazing experience. But I think about that over when you say leadership journey, like when talking to team members and being like, no, you are an expert in this field. Like, you know your stuff. People want your opinion or your help on this. You actually know how to do it well. So yeah, that's interesting. When we were kind of thinking about this, there's that internal dialogue, because I mean, there's two different sides of this. I feel like I seem to keep going from an organization and leadership standpoint, but when we do talk about that internal dialogue that we have in our head that we're not talking to others or talking about it to others. Are there any tips that you have? I can think of one that I have, but are there any tips that you have on, I don't want to say getting through it, but I mean, just at least not letting it overcome you so that you're not limiting what your capabilities are or what you can do.
Yeah. So it's really easy to get into a spiral with this imposter syndrome and to look for these kind of, okay, so sometimes this concept of if you look hard enough for the data, you're going to find data that supports what you are looking for. So if you're looking for evidence of your failure, your insignificance, your not good enoughness, you'll find that evidence. But if you're looking for evidence of your success, your accomplishment, what you've contributed, you'll find that evidence too. And so one thing that I think if somebody catches themselves, and you don't always catch yourself in it, but if somebody catches themselves in that spiraling down to, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, and nobody likes me, that reality check that can come in there of, okay, but what are the facts? Take a moment, take a breath, have a conversation with somebody who you know loves you unconditionally and like in that situation, and be honest and be vulnerable about it. Now, what I do not recommend, if you're a leader who is experiencing feelings of imposter syndrome, do not treat your team like your sounding board. It is not appropriate for the leader to go to the all staff meeting and say, gosh, you guys, you know what? Today I woke up and thought maybe I really shouldn't be a CEO. I haven't made any good choices. I haven't done anything right. Because some people think that's vulnerability, but that is not good leadership. That will do damage that frankly doesn't just cause imposter syndrome, but does in fact cause a lack of confidence from the team and it compromises your leadership ability in that case. So close, trusted circle of people, close, trusted partner, friend, another like a peer level CEO who is not going to come in and try to take over your credit union, but like somebody in your market who can say, oh yeah, I've been there too. And here's how I overcame it. Leaders are humans too. They're going to have bad days. And, frankly, sometimes they're going to earn those bad feelings about themselves. They're going to make bad decisions. They're going to say the wrong thing to somebody and they're going to second guess themselves. And I think if you don't have some tendency to have a little bit of second guessing of yourself, you probably don't deserve to be in that leadership position. If you're sure that 100% of the time you have 100% of the right answers, I'm guessing I could find a place you're wrong pretty quick. So that's kind of, and that's, I think, a difference too, is this, going back to that statistic, 70% of people at some point in their life can point to a time where, despite what everybody else said around them, they thought, well, I'm not sure I deserve this seat at this table. 7 out of 10 people are like, yep, that resonates with me. Not consistently, not all the time. But I think what that is, that self-doubt is a human condition.
That was the thing that I was thinking about when you asked it, is like to have that, whether it's mentor, partner, friend, coach, peer, somebody who's in a similar situation. That's something that I know over time that I've asked the questions. If you want to say I've been authentic or been vulnerable to people that have what I perceive as been through similar situations, to be able to, and a lot of the time they're like, oh yeah, you got it. You kind of need that, right? And I'll be honest, I just had a conversation through text messaging with a mutual friend of ours on Bonaire. She was worrying that, self-employed and something that it wasn't going the way she was. And my recommendation to her was break it down into small wins.
Yeah.
Stop looking at the long-term goal and look for a small win, because you'll see that you've had them. So you're moving in the right direction.
I think that point of reflection is so important. That ability to take a pause. Nope, you didn't build an overnight, sorry, I'm using hand gestures, but you didn't build this overnight mega conglomeration corporation but you came a long way since you had that first idea. You have won clients. I'm thinking about our friend here, like you have won clients, you have made a difference. You have received feedback from individuals who have said, you have changed my life for the better. Those are wins that when you're like, who am I to do this? That's exactly who you are to do that. You're that person that is making that resonate. One thing I'm guessing it's Tim Ferriss, but I heard it from you. I didn't hear it from him. But that like concept of like, you really just need 1,000 true fans.
Oh, no. That's Kevin Kelly's blog post.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. People don't feel like 1,000 true fans is nuts, right? Like if you're going out and you're trying to change the world, 1,000 people is such a little tiny pinpoint of the global population. That's impactful. And I think that's one of the challenges that comes up with imposter syndrome sometimes is people think, well, if I can't be the best in the world as defined by this, I shouldn't even try. And there's still a niche you can carve. You can be the best in the world for those 1,000 true fans at something that, it doesn't make you GE, it doesn't make you Apple, it doesn't make you whatever, but it makes you incredibly relevant in changing the lives of those people.
Apple still had to have their 1,000 true fans too. We will link to the Kevin Kelly blog post, and it might be about 15 or 20 years old now, but it's still out there because I remember I looked at it sometime in the past year again and reread it. So,
you said something earlier. You were talking about when an organization says, oh, well, we're not big enough to do that, or we're not. And it's kind of like that concept of organizational imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I love me some small credit unions. I say all the time, like when I was the league president in Connecticut, half of my credit unions had fewer than 6 employees. And their hearts and their passion and the things they do, amazing. And yet sometimes you'll talk to a credit union who I wouldn't even necessarily characterize as a small credit union, $500 million, $700 million credit union. And they'll be like, well, we're not really big enough to compete. And then you see someone out there like Terry Robinson at Ironworkers USA Federal Credit Union, who's like, takes this, I think, $7 million credit union and is like, let me just go ahead and create this national field of membership where members turn to her for everything now. And she's still not a $5 billion credit union. It's still a small asset-sized credit union, but that relevance to the world, that niche that she's carving, it's so significant that you have to stop and think, like, if she had let imposter syndrome, well, who am I to do this? I'm not your typical financial services executive. This credit union, we've already been told by the regulators, is failing. Like, we should probably just limp it along and take it into that. And her being like, I think I can do this. And like really pulling something incredible out there. I think that's where imposter syndrome could have gotten in the way. Somebody going into that and saying, well, who am I to do this? Like, could have really held something back that's been genuinely life-changing for people. And that's pretty incredible.
I was thinking about, as you were talking about that, because that is a awesome feel-good story of success. But there's the flip side of that, right? And I think that's what you were talking about in the beginning there, of like when leaders are second-guessing themselves, hesitating, you have to take the action. That's why you get that chair. So I do think that it's an interesting trait of leadership, even if you are one of the 7 out of 10 people that have imposter syndrome, that you figure out ways and tools to still push through that. The one that I really wanted to make sure that we talked about before we move on is this idea of overcompensating as a leader and the effect that can have on teams. Your team at Humanidei, you work with a lot of leaders, you do a lot of coaching, a lot of leadership development, right? You mentioned the overconfident person or something of that. Is overcompensating a sign of imposter syndrome? How about that?
Yeah. It shows up most often. Imposter syndrome shows up in one of 2 ways. One is this, okay, I'm not sure I'm good enough, so I'm going to overwork, push really hard, like kind of this, like, I will just try to be perfect. And that may lead me there. The other side is that self-sabotage, I'm not even going to try. So digging in deeper, and that's kind of what we were just talking about.
We were talking about, yeah.
Going into that overcompensating side of it, you think about that, especially for the leader. So you want everyone to think you are perfect, because if you are not perceived as being perfect, someone is going to find out you are flawed and you didn't really deserve that position and you shouldn't be there, and you will be exposed for the, frankly, for the human that you are, but like the
that you think you are,
like for the fraud that you are. You'll be exposed to have flaws. Guess what? 100% of people have flaws. So what do you do if you are so concerned about being perceived as perfect? Not only, and you're the leader, not only do you make sure that you are impeccable in all that you do, but you also are incredibly concerned about how those people who report up to you show up, because you see them as an extension of yourself. Not a reflection of yourself necessarily, but an extension of yourself. So if I am concerned about people thinking I am perfect, I need to know that everyone who reports to me, who's working on my behalf, who's representing me, is perfect too. And perfection is not a standard people can live up to. It's just not. And so in an ideal case, any good leader is going to tell you that they want to coach people, they want to develop people, they want people to fail forward. We see a mistake as a chance for improvement. But if you're dealing with imposter syndrome, despite all of those things you know in your head, you will not be able to stop yourself from feeling a little freaked out when someone who reports to you makes a mistake. And so what that then looks like is micromanagement. It looks like a reprimand. It looks like, you lose your cool in a situation that you should be able to just say, wow, gosh, that must have felt awful to you to make that mistake. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Let's talk through that. Instead, it sounds a lot more like, what were you thinking? How could you make that mistake? And then leaves your people reporting to you feeling even worse. So if they're dealing with any of their own imposter syndrome, then that's a whole nother extension. But that overcompensation, so leaders who are in this place where they're like, my imposter syndrome is cool because it's what makes me have that edge. It's that thing that helps me try harder, push further, be more perfect. Okay, but how does that trickle down? And it doesn't trickle down like beautiful, pristine water in a waterfall. It trickles down like something a little more polluted than that. So.
I always think about it, and we talk about it so often when we're having these conversations about having that self-awareness, like kind of knowing yourself. And I think as we've been talking through this, it's the same thing, is if you can recognize that you're having some imposter syndrome, are you making decisions because of that? Or are you making the correct decision? Are you reacting the right way? Or are you reacting the way that because you're feeling some imposter syndrome? I think it does a lot of the times come back to that.
So I got a question for you, Randy.
Oh boy.
I know, right? So
I'm still not comfortable with these questions.
I know. People are going to be like, that's like a classic CUInsight experience in which Jill answered all Randy's questions. So I'm trying to break that up. We'll go back to the new 2.0 version. But we've framed this conversation a lot on a leader with imposter syndrome, and it might look like this, and this is how that is. But a lot of our listeners we know are young professionals, emerging professionals. They may even be kind of part of this like sandwich generation where they have direct reports and they also have people they report up to. So I'm going to ask you to pontificate a little bit.
Oh boy.
If you're one of those middle managers and your boss is experiencing some of that imposter syndrome, and you can tell because they're micromanaging you, they're expecting perfection, they're pushing too hard, what do you think somebody who's experiencing that type of management might be able to do to support or maybe interrupt that behavior in their boss and move forward? I told you, I just want you to pontificate a little bit on this one. If you're the one who's being managed by that boss with imposter syndrome, what do you think you can do?
Probably get a hold of the people at Humanidei and find a new position. No, I think that's a difficult thing, right?
That was not meant to be that setup.
Yeah. You know me. I'm like, if it's not working, you can change your situation. You can't change other people. So that to me seems we've probably all worked for leaders that we learned from. And that learning might be that we don't want to be that kind of leader. To me, that's when you're in what I would call a subordinate role to try to tell someone that they're doing it wrong. I don't think I have that skill set to do that tactfully. So probably hence the reason I'm self-employed.
That's fair. That's
right.
fair.
No, I would look for a different opportunity. That's just quite honestly. So, Jill, you must have a better answer than that. Not everybody should just quit their jobs and
yeah, I mean, not everybody should just quit their jobs. That's for sure. I asked the question because, as you know, I am a deeply curious person.
Yeah, you are.
Frankly, I'm seeing this trend right now where, and I think we've even talked about this before. Yeah. I appreciate the emphasis on mental health. Like, you know that I grew up in a household that was significantly impacted by severe depression and mental health issues with my mom. And I wish that the world had been different back then. I wish that it hadn't been so stigmatized for her to be able to actually deal with that or get that treatment. So I have a huge amount of appreciation for the emphasis on mental health. And I do have a little bit of concern too, though, that when somebody's in a situation where, you know, the boss is micromanaging or it is difficult, where the first thing is, whoa, toxic work environment, I'm out. We need to see some amount of, I think there should be a balance in that, like, how do you be resilient in that situation, or how do you try to work through conflict or challenge that comes up with that too? There is a power differential, though, when you are in a subordinate position that doesn't necessarily make it safe to go to your boss and say, hey, it feels like maybe you're experiencing some imposter syndrome.
You seem to be struggling right now, and you're taking out on all of us.
Therapy, right? Like,
we all chipped in.
Yeah. I just wanted to leave you this EAP brochure on your desk today. Like,
I'm not sure how well that goes over. So.
And so there is kind of that balance in recognizing that leaders might be struggling with their own kind of challenges with imposter syndrome, and with that, and you as a team member, it doesn't mean you just like buck it up, but also there are a lot of people who reach out to me with that. I'm no longer employed because I left a toxic environment, and now my mental health is even worse because I can't find another role right now. And so to your response, I know this is a huge, like, wild tangent on it, but to that response of, like, you know, if you're in a situation where it's not working for you, maybe this goes back to 2 podcasts ago on resilience, but like, how do you build resilience in that situation so that you can sustain it while, if you do have to look for another job, you can still show up with your own mental health in that situation.
That to me is knowing your own self-worth. Just because somebody else tells you that you're bad or you did a bad job or whatever, sometimes you have to take an honest look at it. It may be right. That may be true. You know, the complaint may be legitimate. But if it's not, you also have, I think there's that side of, don't let that add to the imposter syndrome, right?
Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
The challenge with imposter syndrome is that it's coming in to say, you as a human aren't worthwhile. Like, you as a human are a fraud. You as a human are. And so the response to that is, if I'm perfect, then I'm worthwhile. What we're talking about here is, how do you create a situation or be cognizant about a situation where it's like, you made a mistake, but that doesn't mean you don't have worth as a human, or like you don't have value on that, because we are all going to make mistakes. And so how do we either as leaders instill in our direct reports, our team members, like, you made a mistake, but you're still a valuable, contributing, amazing human. And how do we instill that in ourselves too? Like, despite the fact that I made a mistake, it does not mean I don't deserve to be here in this role, in this position.
Jilly and I think every one of you is worth it and fantastic, just because you're listening, quite honestly. So. You got this. You know, one last thing I want to touch on before we wrap this thing up, if we could give a few strategies. And I think we've kind of talked through these, some of them, but for not only working through imposter syndrome for ourselves, but also within our teams. I guess anything that really sticks out to you, if you were throwing out one or two.
Goodness, I'm going to get sort of a brand around this. That'd be okay. But leaning into curiosity, I won't say her name because I'm not sure she'd be comfortable with it, but I have a friend in the credit union space who I just love the way she thinks. And we were having a conversation recently where she really leaned into this idea of curious, not critical. And this concept of when you're watching the behavior of others, the performance of others, and when you can put yourself into a position where you can kind of like reset that and say, how can I be curious about this and not critical? So if it's your own situation and you're underperforming, or you're second guessing yourself, you're self-sabotaging, you're saying, I'm not good enough unless I get this second certification or degree. Like, be curious about where that's coming from and not critical of, well, gosh, it's because I don't do anything right ever. I'm the worst. I don't follow through. I procrastinate, blah, blah, blah. But like, curious about where those behaviors are coming in from within yourself. But then if you're getting some of that behavior from a team member or even from your boss, like going back to that kind of middle sandwich generation here, and you're getting that, like that sharpness or that underperformance with your direct report, it's not, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? It's a curious tone rather than a critical tone. And if it's your boss and you get snapped at, okay, well, what are they potentially dealing with that's causing that kind of reaction instead of just that, well, worst boss in the world? So that kind of curious, not critical, I think is just such a key point in dealing with all of this sort of human behavior of whether it's perfectionism, whether it's self-sabotage, whether it's second guessing yourself or having someone else second guess you. I think really leaning into that is key.
I'll add one from the individual standpoint. And I think it is that taking a pause and reframing the question you're asking yourself, the thoughts that you're having, and trying to separate facts from that self-talk. Because I think all too often, you can go back to your story. You were already asked to speak. That was qualification enough. I love that you shared that. But like, is it, taking that beat and saying, okay, is this reality or is this the feelings? Because we all have the feelings. So is it the feelings or is this facts?
And your feelings lie to you.
Your feelings can lie to you. That is true in many, many different ways. So, there was one other one that I thought about when I was making notes for this. And it was something that I used to say a lot. And I'll kind of, before we wrap this up, I'll throw this out there. To this day, I keep trying to stop saying that I'm lucky.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if it was like my Midwesternness or whatever it happened to be being brought up. It was like somebody gives me a compliment. I'm like, just lucky.
Shucks.
Shucks, just lucky, and even if it's not saying it out loud, like, no, I worked hard. I earned this. That is a different mindset than the, shucks, I'm just lucky, right? Just another one to leave with. Looking at our time, looking at this little new stopwatch app that's on Zoom. It's probably not new. It's just that I found it today. So anyway, we're going to wrap this up. But before we sign off, we got to leave you with a few takeaways, because what's a good conversation like this without some parting words of wisdom? So, Jilly, what's jumping out at you as the takeaway?
Yep. So I think that my key takeaway from this conversation is whether you're experiencing imposter syndrome yourself or you're observing it in your team members, the most important thing you can do is lean into creating psychologically safe environments through curiosity. So how do you stay curious about what's really happening, whether within yourself, with your team members, even with your boss in that, stay curious about those feelings. Don't just accept them as facts. And what's your key takeaway?
It's fake it till you make it. No, I'm just joking. No, it really is the last.
Everybody is just faking it.
And that's all we're doing. Just know that everybody else is still faking it till they make it too. So it kind of does tie into that though, but it's take that beat, take that pause and really know yourself and be able to have that internal conversation with yourself honestly. Are these feelings or are these facts? Because like I said, I think everybody who's listening to this, certain skill set in the credit union space. So
your talent matters.
Your talent matters, and you're probably much more qualified than you realize. Yeah, take that beat and then celebrate the small wins. I think we all feel good when we celebrate things. And if you can do that, maybe the imposter syndrome goes away a little bit. So that's it.
All right.
That was a fun conversation, and we've got more to come in upcoming episodes. Some exciting ones for y'all. So stay tuned. And that's a wrap. But before we go, just a few quick things. As always, we'll link to everything we mentioned in the show notes, so be sure to check those out, including Kevin Kelly's blog post from many moons ago about 1,000 true fans. Jill is also always lighting up LinkedIn and keeping me in the loop on what's trending. I've been trying to get on there a little bit more myself. We'd love to hear from you there. Drop us a message, share your thoughts, ask questions, suggest a topic. maybe even guests for future episodes. Let's keep this conversation going. A big thank you to our new sponsor, Alacrity. They are a leading payments fintech helping credit unions compete with challenger banks and digital wallets. So be sure to check them out. Click their link in the show notes and show them some love. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're everywhere you can listen. So whether that's Apple or Spotify or Amazon, whoever it may be. If you're looking for a book that's been mentioned on the show in the past, just Google the CUInsight Experience podcast book list and your next great read is one click away. I actually had a couple of books I was going to mention, but forgot to. So maybe I'll add those to the show notes. And of course, a huge thank you to you for tuning in. Y'all rock. We appreciate every single one of you. Be well, friends.